Star Trek, the next generation. Your love throughout the nation. You're my favourite show. Was in every episode, you're lucky. You don't have to wait for buses. You just step into the transporter and off you boldly go. Mr. Wall's my favourite person.
We are the Org. Our mission is to assimilate Star Trek The Next Generation, Star Trek Deep Space Nine, and beer. Lots of beer.
Hello!
Hello!
And welcome to bOrgCast 7.6. A bit of general feedback from the last podcast. I mentioned about I couldn't find anywhere on Memory Alpha what ship Verad was using, which was we only saw briefly in a scene from Invasive Procedures. But having done a bit more, they do mention the name of the ship very briefly, and I turned the subtitles on and did a search on that, and it turns out that the model they used was the Lycian Sentry Pod from way back in Conundrum, which they've used a couple of times in Next Gen, but I think this is first Deep Space Nine appearance. We also, of course, had the great debate over whether to continue with my IMDb rating for every episode. And it has to be said that we had an awful lot of feedback on Twitter. Thanks very much, folks.
Thank you.
And it was a resounding victory for Team Peter. Yay!
So now you've got to come up with a jingle.
I've come up with a jingle, and Mr. Purry has suggested a name for the segment.
Yes.
So he gets the no prize. That's been sent in the post, sir. We also had some tunes suggested by JJ for the new segment, but I've gone for one that she didn't suggest. But you'll hear that when we get to it. But thank you, JJ. She also mentioned the Quartermaster Stores, which we played out on last time. It was a staple road trip song in our family with increasingly ridiculous lyrics.
And we also heard from Damien Allmark, who's Argyle Smurf on Twitter. He's just started listening, so he's on Measure of a Man, and he says he loved it. Thank you. I guess it'll be a while
before you hear this message, yes.
But hello.
Blimey, way back near the beginning of Season 2. Okay, so let's find out what this evening's Next Generation episode is like. Dark Page.
In the darkest corners of the mind,
It's so strange. It's almost as if her brain has shut itself down.
hide the deepest secrets of the past,
I'm going to try and contact her telepathically.
where shocking memories may lurk.
Get away from here! No!
And the only thing more dangerous than getting in
I want you to sever your connection to your mother.
is getting out.
This isn't real.
Next time on Star Trek The Next Generation.
Well, the trailer doesn't have any spoilers.
No, it's a pretty well-made trailer, that one. Pretty good stuff.
Yeah. So I'm not going to give a massive synopsis, simply because an awful lot of it's watch, don't tell.
Uh-huh.
So, but I'm going to cover the key points. So you start with the fact that there's this race called the Cairn on the Enterprise. They're looking to join the Federation, but they're a telepathic species with no verbal language, so they've got to learn to speak to be able to communicate effectively with the other Federation races. And Loaxana, as a telepath and ambassador, is helping them.
Yeah, it's nice to see her being used for a decent reason rather than just appearing just for comedy relief, which she has done a bit.
Yes.
This is not a comedy relief episode.
No.
Although there is a bit of comedy to start with.
There is. So there's a reception, but nobody's in dress uniform, and Deanna's wearing something fucking disgusting.
It's pink at the top and then purple at the bottom.
And it's
Either
off
one
the
of those-
shoulder, one side, but not the other.
Either one of those colours would have been okay, and the close-ups aren't so bad because you only see the pink, but the two together just make you want to vom. Horrible. She's like a nightmare cocktail.
Yeah, she is actually. Oh, yeah, no, it's really bad.
And it comes to something when she's wearing something far worse than what her mother's wearing, although there are
Yeah.
reasons for that we find out later on.
Which might be why that they went with it. Even so, it's just a horribly designed, They could still have got her wearing something bright, couldn't they?
Yes.
Without it being that.
If it had just been pink or just purple, that would have been fine.
I
But...
still don't like the whole on one shoulder, off another.
Yeah, well, that's been
thing.
a fairly running theme, hasn't it? But yeah.
So yeah, not only does she look terrible, but nobody's in dress uniform, even though there's loads of diplomats and
That
stuff.
is odd, isn't it? Yes.
Which is odd. And then you get Deanna introduced to Marquise, and their language is still, so you can understand it, but he just goes, "Your mother told me of your need, husband," which is, understandably outrageous.
Mm-hmm.
Results in Deanna glaring at Loaxana, but you can just see sort of like the direction of her glare, and then it's end teaser. So you think, watching this, that you're set up for a typical Lwaxana Troi episode, and that she's just going to be a ridiculous nightmare the entire time, and it's all going to be her being ridiculous. But when you cut back, you've got Deanna understandably remonstrating with her mother in a lift, but then she cries and gets emotional, which is not like her at all. And then you have Marquise comes to see Deanna, concerned about Lwaxana, but it turns out that the Cairn have never had telepathy with non-Cairn, and their telepathy is different. It's images rather than the words that we hear exchanged sort of between Deanna and her mother. And so Deanna thinks, when he starts talking about a dark place in Lwaxana's mind, that he's talking about privacy, which is a concept that's new to him. So she doesn't worry about it too much. That said, you then cut to Troi and Riker, and she's saying to him that she broke down, and she's concerned that it's not just a small thing, because, she's not even dressing the same. She's wearing subdued outfits. And just as Riker's about to say, don't worry about it, she appears and starts poking him in the chest and shouting at him that it's because of you that she's not married, and starts crying. It's all a bit odd.
Yep.
But then she's in sickbay. Crusher says she doesn't really know what's wrong, but the bit of the Betazoid brain to do with telepathy is working overtime. So she says, look, you've got to be rest from telepathy. So then they're with the Cairn in the Arboretum that just looks like a bit of AstroTurf on a conference room floor. It looks shit.
It doesn't look great, no. And we haven't seen the Arboretum, of course, since Keiko left.
No.
That was their sort of natural habitat before.
But I think when they had it with Keiko, it looked better. Maybe they shot it differently.
Maybe, yes. It was less obviously AstroTurf before.
Yeah, wasn't it? Yeah. Anyway, I think her name is supposed to be Hedron or something, but I'm afraid she just stuck in my mind as Hadron.
No, it's Hedril.
like the Large Hadron Collider. Anyway, she falls in the water and Lwaxana passes out. Then you have a number of scenes dotted throughout this, the same kind of thing, which is where they're going, we don't know what's wrong, I don't understand, could it be something to do with the telepathy, I don't know, there isn't enough information, and the Cairn guy, Marquis, sits there looking stern and confused and says, I don't have the words, and then maybe he sort of talks to Deanna, and there may be some physiological effects, but they don't really know. This happens a lot. Basically, they don't have a fucking clue. The only way they're going to find anything out is for Marquise to be a bridge so that Deanna can go into her mother's mind. There's 2 attempts. The first attempt isn't particularly successful, even though she's warned there will be barriers and everything is a barrier. She sees Large Hadron Collider, sort of screams... Sorry about that was the cat. She sees Large Hadron Collider, screams and sort of comes out of it. And then there's some talking to Mr. Hom and further investigation that also doesn't get anywhere. So when she goes back in the second time, she works on not being scared. And it's in this second time when she goes in, she sees like a star field, and ordinarily you wouldn't go anywhere near one if there wasn't a door where you're expecting a door or a wall where you're expecting a wall. But having had the first experience that was unsuccessful, she goes through drops and lands in the Arboretum, and there she sees the scene, the memory that is causing Lwaxana basically to be dying of the damage being done to what they call her metaconscious. And it's basically that Deanna had an older sister who drowned in a tragic accident, for which Lwaxana blames herself and has never been able to forgive herself, and coped, in inverted commas, by never talking about it, like a lot of people did with the whole what they went through in the war, first and second. Coped by not.
Yep.
And I know for us in our day and age that might seem bonkers. I mean, might be automatically, but you must talk about it. But even for us, there's an older generation.
Yep.
For whom that was how you coped with things.
Indeed, yes.
And that was how Lwaxana tried to cope, was by...
And there's a sort of medical side of this as well, because there's lots of... Well, not lots, but there's some sort of reference to Betazoid telepathy.
Oh, you get business. A lot of medical,
and it's kind of like,
medical techno.
So it's partly her consciously burying this stuff, but it's partly to do with the bit around telepathy is it's hiding it away as well. I don't know. It's
yeah, it wouldn't normally have been triggered and caused her problems were it not for the way that her mind, her brain is interacting with the Cairn brain. There's a deleted scene that you've got on the Blu-ray where that is explicitly stated that she would have taken this hidden bit of her past, this secret, to her grave if it weren't for the fact that the way that Cairn telepathy works meant that her brain couldn't cope with hiding it anymore. And I realise that doesn't really do justice to the episode, because it is a moving episode, but so much of it is repetitive and technobabble and whatever. I thought it was better to just do a briefer synopsis.
Well, a lot of it is images anyway. When
it
she's
is.
in Loaxana's head, you get all the stuff with the wolf and
it's not just images as well. It's the score. I think the score of this is
very
very
good,
good.
yeah.
And it's just me trying to
Quite
talk
creepy.
about it. Doesn't really do it justice.
and the lighting as well. Actually, is
Yeah,
very good
and the
as well.
direction. And I would say that as well, because it did strike me at the time, when things aren't real, as appears to be certainly a next gen trope, but I don't think it's exclusive to next gen. It's a fisheye lens.
Yes. Which, it's a bit unfortunate because obviously it's come straight after Phantasms, where they were using a fisheye lens for Data's dream scene, but I mean, it's kind of a
Yes, it's a thing.
standard thing now,
it's
isn't it?
almost like the Wibbly thing on
Wibbly
Scooby-Doo.
screen when you have a flashback, yes,
Yeah.
effectively.
Or putting something in black and white. You know,
Yeah.
it's just there to tell you this isn't what's happening
Shortcut.
now.
Yeah.
So yeah, I mean, me racing through it might imply this was a bad episode. It isn't. It's very good. It's just it's not something I can really do justice to. You've got to watch it.
Okay. Well, I think it's probably time to look at the players in this particular story. So
We're fingering the bit parts.
okay. So there's really only the two speaking parts that are significant.
It's Kirsten Dunst, isn't it?
Who's the child? Well done.
Large
yes.
Hadron Collider.
Yes.
And she was one of the incarnations of Spider-Man's woman or something.
That's
wasn't
right. Yeah, she was Mary Jane in the Spider-Man films that were done by Sam Raimi. And then you've also got Norman Large. Having it large, who's Marquis or Marquis.
Or Marquise, as they keep
Yes,
calling it.
it's a variation in pronunciation here. Who was last seen in Duet under a lot of makeup, so you wouldn't have recognised him. But he was more recognisable in Unification as Proconsul Neral. No? Okay. I think he does a really good job in this. At times he seems quite threatening, and that's partly the
Yes.
music and the lighting. But sometimes he seems like he's a threat, and it could be him behind it all.
Yeah.
Which is a nice thing to do, because otherwise it would be very...
Well, the thing is as well, their look is very similar to the three people with Keiko in the teacup and Rapey Man.
Oh, yes. Not without the awful fashions, but...
As in the makeup job, and
Yeah.
I wonder whether that's deliberate.
Yeah, now that was the previous season, wasn't it? Where he was inserting horrible memories into Troy.
Yeah.
Should be able to remember the name of that one, but...
They wore white a lot. Yeah, there should be a thing you can search where you can remember like really bizarre random things about an episode, but not who any of the characters were, or actors, or races, or possibly even what season it was in, and then you can look it up. I want that thing.
Was it Violations? Violent.
Oh, it might have been.
Right, to Memory Alpha. Yes, with the Ulians. I think.
That's it.
Yep, it was Violence. Yay, I win! Diddly-dee-dee-dee.
But yeah, the makeup job is similar, and I wondered whether that was deliberate, and then
Yeah.
it makes him look and seem threatening.
I don't think they were making them look like... I mean, they were making them look like they had big brains, weren't they? Which is sort of logical if they'd got sort of advanced telepathy. But he's quite sinister at times.
Yes.
Just the way he stares at Deanna, and actually it's because he's struggling to communicate.
Yeah.
And he also does that thing where he's clearly struggling with language as well.
Yeah.
It's, when you've got somebody who's speaking a second language. Yeah. It's very well observed. That I've enjoyed that.
Or someone like you and me when we've had too much beer and the words won't come.
Yes, quite, which happens a lot.
Yes.
So they were good. I suppose it's also worth mentioning while we're at it, guy who plays Deanna's dad, because he appears in Loaxana's mind when Deanna's there. And he's played by Amit Bairam, who was in the one where Geordie got infected on the planet of the Abes. You know, the one where he was turned into a sort of lizard guy.
I know the one you mean.
Pretty sure that one's Identity Crisis, but again, yet for the second time in as many minutes, I'm going to have to check now. And that's 2 for 2. It was Identity Crisis. I'm on fire tonight, I tell you.
Just slowly.
Yeah, I was going to say, it'd be so much better if this immediately came to me and I knew I was right, rather than having to double check, but never mind. I think he's really good. I mean, obviously he's not in as much. He's in it more than he was in Identity Crisis. All he did there was crash a shuttle into a planet. as he turned into
so
an ape
this
thing.
really is fingering the bit parts then. This is somebody who appears in a dream type sequence, or a memory briefly in an episode, who we know from being even more briefly in another episode where all he did was crash a shuttle.
Admittedly, one of the more interesting things about his performance in this one is the fact that he's wearing, of course, the classic movie Trek era uniform.
I did notice that, but to be honest, it could have been anybody in that. Didn't really make me notice the actor.
He seemed sweet, though.
Just made me notice the uniform.
What was called for. And it's also sweet that Waxana still carries around a picture of him as well, I think, after all these years. That's nice. Mr. Hom we don't get to see, of course.
No.
Because Carol Struckian wasn't available to appear in it. So there we are. Mr. Hom gets a mention, but no appearance. I thought it was a brilliant performance by Marina Sirtis. Really thrown her all into it. And Majel Barrett's all right as well. Noticeable some of the cutscenes she's not so good in, actually. I can see why they cut one of them. Yeah. But generally, the scenes they included, she's good.
Yeah. I think the only thing that doesn't work for me, but again, it might be a generational thing, I don't know, is the idea. I mean, I get that she didn't tell anyone anything, and it was her approach to just pretend it never happened, don't talk about it. And that's what she asked of her husband, and he did that to help her. Mr. Hom's a servant, that makes sense. But would there not have been people, like extended family and friends, who knew they had a 7-year-old daughter, who would surely have said something at some point?
Arguably, yes, it is a bit odd that nobody else is in on this. Yeah. You just don't know what the family setup is, do you? Because maybe that's it when it comes to their family.
Or maybe they moved away. I mean, that for me was the only bit that made me question it. I mean, because she does say, she lived here for a bit when she was a baby. Maybe they did move away, and maybe that was why. So nobody knew.
Yeah, maybe.
But for me, that was the only bit I struggled with. Obviously, it is a major trauma. We know that people can bury trauma, and betas' brains are different. So the only thing I think I would say is I could have done with less medical technobabble.
Yes, we didn't need quite as much as we got, certainly.
But overall, it's moving, and it's a good story, I think, and well acted in the main.
Okay, so we heard from the Mark. Dark Page or a male-female divide? Okay. Dark Page is the sort of episode that I frequently ask for in theory. An episode that uses sci-fi concepts to tell relatable human stories. But I guess be careful what you wish for, because in practice this episode for me is a dud. While Deanna enters her mother's mind, we get a barrage of strange dream images shot through a fisheye lens and signifying important things, as if the producers had forgotten they had made Phantasms the week before. Actually, no, they hadn't, and their problem was they didn't have another story to go, so they had to go with this one next. Phantoms was also a mess, to be sure, but it was fun and breezy one that didn't take itself so damn seriously. Dark Page feels like a bunch of melodrama cliches from the 1950s. A little harsh, I can't help feeling.
Yeah.
I could maybe overlook all of these problems if the emotional payoff at the end were worth it. Alas, it's not. There's a lot of sobbing and maudling excess, but I don't find any of it convincing beyond the most general idea of, well, yeah, it's pretty sad when a child dies. Oh, blimey, if you thought that was a lot of sobbing, be grateful you didn't see the full and expurged version.
Oh, blooming it, yes, that deleted scene, oh boy.
I suppose that I'm glad the story actually resolves itself with character and emotion instead of pointless sci-fi and technobabble. But none of this feels necessarily organic to me. I felt more embarrassed for Majel Barrett's solid try to rise to the occasion and deliver a credible performance than I felt invested in this tragedy that Waxana has supposedly been repressing for 30 years. I guess the lesson of Dark Page is that some storytelling stones are better left unturned. But within the notion that, okay, fine, Waxana lost a daughter, there was an opportunity for mother-daughter bonding, and Deanna to mention that she's lost a child herself in Ian Andrew. Oh yes, that's a point.
Oh yes!
Although we do try and forget that particular episode.
We do, this is fair, but...
And what, if anything, that has meant to her? I'm not wild about revisiting the child.
Yeah.
But if you're going to do the child loss well, it's a bit of a notable omission. You're very right there, sir.
That's a good point. I think we'd forgotten it deliberately.
Yes. Boring, slowly paced and emotionally overindulgent, and a Troy on a 90% cocoa bender. It looks backwards, and good science fiction looks forward. Gene Roddenberry was very specific in that he didn't like morning episodes. 24th century officers are beyond that, plus the concept is simple and boring. Majel should have said no to this episode. But, sorry, people are still going to mourn in the 24th century, I'm sorry, it's just a natural part of humanity.
And I think it was well acted, and I think it was moving, and it was a good story. But, although I disagree with you on most of your points, I do agree that actually there should have been a reference.
Well, are you going to agree with this?
Oh, okay.
But that's my view as a man. And here is the thing, I've talked about this with some men and women, and truth be told, 90% of the episode get a much better and deeper reaction from women. I remember the episode had a real effect on my mother when I saw it as a kid, and it's why I don't hate this one, it's just not for me. Well, I'm not sure that's true, and this is partly coming out of a conversation with Drew down the pub last week.
Oh, right, okay.
But the divine might not be male-female, possibly, but again, we wouldn't know for certain without asking around more, but possibly those who have had children, and those who hadn't, because I was fairly affected by it.
Yeah.
But Drew and Tracy, who's definitely female Tracy, weren't so affected by it, but we'll find out about that in a bit.
Yeah. I think if you've got children, emotionally you can put yourself in that place.
But that's not to say, you see, I'd be interesting, we won't know, obviously, I don't suppose, but it'd be interesting to hear from somebody who doesn't have children, but is emotionally affected by this, which I'm sure is possible. It would be interesting. I mean, it's the danger of big generalisations, isn't it? You know?
Yeah, I suppose.
As a parent, I mean, I always found that intensely annoying before I was a parent, so I've always been very careful not to use that, having become one.
Maybe it's one of those things, well, just you know, thinking on my feet here, but I wouldn't be surprised if your sister was affected by this episode because she's close to our children. So maybe it's about having a close relationship with children, not necessarily exclusively as a parent. But not everybody does have a close relationship with children, sometimes until they're a parent, and sometimes they just never do.
Okay, he goes on, but damn, I'm starting to think this is not a true utopia after all. The crew is not a bunch of idealistic explorers spreading the good news of Federation, but a bunch of despondent, desperate individuals trying to escape the horror of the hostile, desolate world. Let us look at our crew. Jean-Luc Picard, nephew killed in a blazing inferno. Well, that hasn't happened yet, but you could also add to that possibly a very bad relationship with his brother. Yes, his family relationships aren't great. Will Riker, mother died when he was a kid. You could also add to that the fact he hasn't got a good relationship with his father. Yeah. Deanna Troi, sister drowned when she was a baby, father died when she was still a kid. Both Bev and Wes Crusher, husband died when Wesley was a kid. Data, all of his numbers were eaten alive. What? All of his numbers were eaten alive? What does that mean? Mother died, father murdered, daughter died, forced to kill his own brother.
Oh gosh, yeah.
Worf, parents killed when he was a kid.
Yes.
Girlfriend murdered, wife murdered.
Okay.
There's also a comment about his brother, but I will edit that. Tasha Yar. Well, that's not going to end well, is it? Grew up in a supposedly failed anarchic world, just fine, filled with drugs and rape gangs, then went to the Utopian Federation and promptly got killed. Ro Laren escaped a horrid occupation. Geordie LaForge, by being born blind, he satiated the Grim Reaper. What? As a reward, his mom managed to survive all the way to middle age before dying horribly. Well, dying mysteriously anyway in the end, wasn't it? Why is there really this much tragedy in these people's lives? Does anyone have a social circle in which everyone has a significant loss in their life like this? Well, some of these are due to Starfleet. Does Starfleet really have that much loss of life during time of peace? Do people really accept that higher casualty rate? Tossing out random tragedies is a cheap way of creating drama, and having conveniently dead family members as a way of not introducing them gets a bit stale after a while. Well, to be fair, I think this is symptomatic of they're running out of ideas in Season 7, so, we haven't explored Loaxana, so let's explore her and insert a bit of tragedy here where there wasn't any before, so...
Yeah.
You have a point, so I think it's fair to say on that front. This one also reeks a bit of silliness. Did Deanna not have any aunts or uncles? That was kind of the point you were making.
It was,
No grandparents, no other family members or old friends who would not be okay with keeping this a secret. Or for that matter, once Deanna knew that this was all about a memory Loaxana was repressing, why couldn't she just ask Hom, surely? Well, you got the impression that Hom was under orders not to tell her. Hence he only produces the photo right at the end when all's come out into the open, so... But she does try and contact Hom, doesn't she? So.
Yeah.
So, yes, he's keeping Stum under orders, as opposed to his usual keeping Stum. Yes. Okay, well, some fairly racy stuff there, sir, but some also on-the-nail stuff as well.
Yes, yeah.
Okay, let's find out what the Pie Man made of this.
Hello, Orgs. Parry here to talk about Dark Page. Now, this episode kind of seemed a bit absent in my memory, like I had a blank spot where this one was revealed, and in fact, I initially thought it was a different episode, with the sort of title on a Troy episode. So, how was it? As you said last week, it is an interesting concept, the idea that there's a missing Troy sibling, a daughter which Troy's parents lost very early on. And that is sort of interesting, and Lwaxana has basically suppressed this entirely. She's almost walled it off in her head, and it's causing her harm. But I just found the execution so dull. I mean, it doesn't help that the kind of fully telepathic race who are only just learning to talk, while they were quite interesting, there was so much sort of, I'm doing psychic scowling now, scowl, and yeah, it was just, there was tedium in that. I just found this episode dragged and dragged and dragged. I think it didn't help that when I worked out which one it was, I roughly knew what happened, and I think it was meant to be an emotional episode, and it's nice that they're giving Lwaxana this stuff. For ages she was the comedy relief, and actually her last few plots have had some really good character stuff for it. It's just a shame that this is just, it was plodding and tedious. I really couldn't be bothered with it at all. There was, why is Lwaxana's psychic representation the inside of the Enterprise? Surely it would be somewhere she's familiar with. But of course, that's the sets they've got, so it is. And yeah, just in general, while it should be, I think we really should have felt more for this. I just didn't feel enough to make this episode work for me. I thought it just, like I say, it fell flat when it should have been this big emotional thing. And indeed, like we say, interesting concepts are abound in this one, but I just don't think it really makes much of them. So yeah, where we've had previous episodes which were, a poor concept being helped by decent writing and acting. The acting wasn't off in this, I'll give it that, but this one was a decent concept, let down by just a flat script. And yeah, it was just, there are some nice scenes that I quite like. Lwaxana being her old comedy self at the beginning, that was fun. But then on in, it was just, oh god. It doesn't help that I think I didn't enjoy this first time round, and when I realised which one it was, my mind's automatically going, oh no, it's this one. Oh, this one is tedious. I mean, don't get me wrong, there's worse Trek, but I really didn't like this one. So I will be back shortly to talk about what is a much better episode of Deep Space Nine. Until then, bye for now.
Bye.
Bye.
Aha, well that blows my theory out the water, and it's kind of nice. It does as well, because it means you truly can't generalise. Because
no, you can't.
Murray's a parent, and he wasn't bothered by it much either. So there we go. Yes, Lwaxana's mind is the corridors of the Enterprise for reasons of cheapness.
Yeah.
And it's also, but I also agree, it's nice that she's given some non-comedy stuff.
Yeah.
So it's just obviously only we found this one interesting so far. Anyway, let's find out what Drew and Tracy thought of this.
Hello, this is our feedback for Star Trek Next Generation, Dark Page. So, what did you think about this?
Well, normally I start our feedback with, so, what did you think of that?
Yes,
but I had to just kick this off and say, this was shit. I'm sorry. This was a rubbish episode. They spent about 45 minutes with a load of dross, with 5 minutes at the end, which could have been a bit good, but actually it was rubbish.
The episode was rubbish, and there was a bit of a punch in the guts of like dead child stuff.
What was this?
Like, living TV kind of don't walk into the light kind of rubbish.
It was a badly written episode, because I think that had they explored it a bit more, yes, there is something in this episode about her having a repressed memory. Why, though, have they never told Troy that she's got a sister? That was the worst bit. But I don't understand what Marquis had to do with it, because he was just a Ted Danson lookalike who, every time he was doing his kind of psychic connection with Deanna or Lwaxana, had the raised eyebrow, crossed eye.
You know what it was?
Look.
It was a poo face.
I was really trying not to say that.
When you do a poo.
The concentration on the loo, yeah.
It was, yeah. I
Very
think that's
true.
where you
But
got to lead this episode.
I don't understand
Poo
what
face.
his purpose was, because in the end,
God.
they kind of cured her without him. And, it was good to see Kirsten Dunst here with a little bit of the vocoder Daft Punk going on at the beginning, but just really...
I know. I don't know about you. I haven't got any more to say about this. I just think
but
rubbish.
then Yeah, I can't. I can just go on and on all night about how shit this was, but I've got nothing constructive to say at all. So let's just leave it there.
It wasn't terrible, but it's just not a good episode.
Please. It's one of these episodes again where I'm like, give me the hour of my life back.
Exactly.
I could have done without watching this.
Okay, let's leave it there then.
Yeah, let's leave it there. Thank you very much.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye. I did say they didn't like it.
Yeah.
I've no idea what this living TV thing is.
No, I can only bring up Sky Living.
Right, but I'm rather pleased I don't. By the sounds of it, it's quite awful. Oh, we're all on our own in liking this. Oh, poor us. Never mind. I rather suspect there might be a bit more agreement on our Deep Space Nine episode, though.
Well, if it's got Garak in it,
Yes.
and it's got Golden Cut in it,
Yes.
it's got to be a good one, isn't it?
It has really. Let's put that to the test.
When the war is over, hatred may be all that remains.
You are a Cardassian butcher.
And prejudice can last a lifetime.
Cardassians are suggesting that the Bajorans are raising these orphans to hate their own people.
In matters of politics and power,
I was ordered to leave them behind.
children may be the silent victims. Sweet torture for that boy living like that.
Have you come to take us back to Cardassia?
On the next episode of Star Trek Deep Space Nine.
So, our last Deep Space Nine episode we covered was investigating a lot more about Trills.
Yep.
Guess which race we'll be learning about in Cardassians?
Yeah.
Bashir and Garak are having a date at the Replimat. The Doctor is still trying to get the Cardassian to admit that he's a spy, and you can tell that Siddiq and Robinson are enjoying playing the scene.
Yes.
Garak spots a Bajoran with a Cardassian boy and goes over to strike up a conversation, only to get bitten on the hands. And it's time again to find out.
Come on, tell me who you are. 'Cause I really wanna know.
In Fingering the Bit Parts, we have Rugal, who's played by Vidal Peterson, who was last seen in Unification again, weirdly. He played Datan, the young Romulan who idolised Spock.
No.
You don't remember Unification at all, do
It
you?
had Spock in it. I know who the villain was.
Uh-huh.
Garak dies off screen. It's got
Yes.
Picard in it.
Yes, well done, but clearly you're not quite remembering enough.
Remembering the key points, not who all the extras are that don't necessarily get names.
You fail. Anyway,
Says you.
Rugal's Bajoran father is played by Terence Evans, who we recently saw as the mute Baltrim, friend of Mullibok in Progress. So this is the second Bajoran he's played in the series.
Okay, so you're saying we should remember this person who didn't speak?
Yes, but he had a fairly large part, even though he was mute. And he also had a role in Terminator 2, which we've not seen I've not seen in donkey's years. What about you? And he was also apparently in the Texas Chainsaw remakes as well. But he's got a very distinctive face, very long in the face. That's our teaser. Poor old Garak getting bit. So Bashir goes and tells his pals in Ops all about it, and Dax jokes that it must be another unsatisfied customer.
Yeah.
And O'Brien says that Garak always cuts his underpants too long.
No, pants, he says.
I
Pants.
know, but you know what pants means in this country.
Yeah.
Always makes me giggle. And bear in mind that's O'Brien. I did ask Dimbo Sama whether the Irish call trousers pants, and it's not a thing in Northern Ireland, which is where he hails from. Whether it's a thing in the Republic or not, I don't know. We need to find somebody from the Republic of Ireland to let us know if they do indeed call trousers pants, because otherwise O'Brien is saying that Garak makes his underpants too long. Doubloons! Not doubloons. What are the things?
Pantaloons.
Pantaloons! That's the thing. Doubloons are the coins, aren't they?
Yes.
I went on a pirate track for a minute there. Kira suggests the boy could well be an orphan left behind when the Cardis pulled out. Then Gulda Cat hails. He's already heard the news about Garak being bitten.
He's like, how?
Yeah. He calls the abandonment of war orphans a disgrace and suggests they're being raised to hate their own kind. And sadly, this was the moment when I remembered how it all panned out, but never mind.
See, I didn't. I only remembered bits.
Right. He describes Garak as being an amiable fellow, which becomes very amusing when you realise they're not exactly best of friends. And Cisco promises to look into the situation. Rugal's father refuses to apologise for bringing up his son in the knowledge of what the Cardassians did to Bajor, and they see him, Rugal, as being a Bajoran and love him. Then we get this chap called Zolan, although he's never named on the screen. Who's Are you interested in the actor? You're not interested in this actor, are you? I'm not even going to pursue this one. He's on a winning streak at the Dabo table. Not sure.
A really bad one as well. Quark comments on it, and
Yeah. That's his only line. Quark's only line in this episode. Yeah, and it's like.
But you've already established he's winning, and then in quite a short space of time you get Dabo,
Yeah.
which doesn't normally happen.
Not sure what race he's supposed to be, but it looks like his brain is sticking out the top of his head. He's also wearing a jacket that seems to have loads of mobile phone parts stuck to it, very bizarrely. All a bit hodgepodge, really. Bashir quizzes him about Rugal, and Zolan says that the boy was beaten by his parents as revenge against Cardassians. So suddenly the plot moves up a gear, and we've got a child protection case on our hands. Rugal's father denies any ill treatment. Sisko tells him they're going to place the boy in Keiko's care while the investigation takes place. Rugal complains that he didn't do anything wrong. So biting people's hands isn't wrong.
Yeah.
Duh. Garak is receiving more treatment in sickbay when Bashir mentions Gul Dukat is concerned with his well-being and the war orphans, which comes as a surprise to the tailor. Yeah. He points out that Cardassian attention to detail would suggest the orphans weren't forgotten about.
Yeah.
And points out it was Dukat who was in charge of the withdrawal. It's a lovely scene, very well played by Robinson. So many layers on his performance here. In Ops, Sisko hails the girl to bring him up to speed, and Dukat makes it clear they expect Rugal to be returned to them, asking for a sample of his DNA to be sent so they can return him to the right family. And then Bashir walks in and interrupts.
I just love this. Just awesome.
Much to Sisko's obvious annoyance.
Yeah, he doesn't say anything.
No, he just gives him a look. The Doctor points out it was under Dukat's watch that the orphans were left behind, but the Cardassian claims he was following the civilian government's orders. The Doctor in turn points out how unlikely this was that civilians would be in charge of the military. Dukat detects the hand of Garak at work. Yeah. He's clearly pissed off. Bashir then gets his bollocking from Sisko.
Oh, I love this though. You know.
He's lying.
Is that an opinion? Or do you have evidence to support it?
I have Garak.
Garak.
He seems to think there's more going on here than we realize.
What exactly does he think is going on?
I'm not sure. He doesn't actually tell me what he really thinks. I sort of have to deduce it.
So, you deduced that Garak thinks Dukat is lying about something you're not sure of, and you proceeded to interrupt my conversation to confront him about whatever that might be.
I'm sorry, Commander. It just seemed an opportune...
Don't apologize. It's been the high point of my day. Don't do it again.
That's brilliant.
Sisko decides he needs to speak to Garak. And the look that Kira gives Bashir is like, ooh.
Uh-oh.
O'Brien comes home to find that Molly has been playing with Rugal all afternoon, which the chief is not best pleased to hear about. And Keiko rightly gives her husband a bollocking for saying something so racist.
Yeah, I mean, he is nasty.
Yeah. I mean, okay, you know that he was involved in a nasty conflict with them, but even so, you'd expect someone in the Federation to rise above it, really.
Yeah.
She's cooked blue vomit for dinner.
Yeah.
Which turns out to be a stew made with Cardassian Zabo meat. Oh, that sounds appetising, doesn't it? Zabo meat.
It made me think of a zebu. Now, isn't that a hybrid animal between a zebra and a something?
Yes, something like that, isn't it?
I don't know what, but that's what came to mind, is that they were eating one of these strange crossbreed thingies.
Neither Miles nor Rugal are impressed by the food and push their plates away at the same time.
I wouldn't blame them. It looks really grotty and like toothpaste and manky. And
so the two of them make a connection in a really nicely directed scene, the way that the plates meet and then you pan up to see their faces. And
yet again, Keiko's served shit and O'Brien isn't happy.
Yes, she's not the greatest cook, is she?
No, she's not. And given that all she has to do is press some fucking buttons in a replicator, I can understand his disgust, really.
Later, Miles is working on his laptop, and it is clearly a laptop. It's bizarre, isn't it? I expect when we first watched that looked really futuristic, but now that looks a bit bulky, doesn't it?
Yeah.
Rugal walks in, because he can't sleep through worry about what will happen to him, poor chap. The chief points out that Rugal should get a say in what happens to him, quite rightly, although that's rather ironic considering how things turn out. The boy wants to return to the only home he knows, and claims his parents have never done anything to harm him. But interestingly, O'Brien claims to have gotten his bottom whacked a few times in his youth, which clearly shows the Federation isn't as advanced as we thought.
No.
I mean, blimey, I don't know whether that just sounded rather more normal back in the 90s when this was shown, but it doesn't sound good now, does it?
Nope.
Rugal points out that he's never been smacked or hurt because his parents follow the teachings of the prophets, who are clearly rather more humane than historical Christian teaching on parenting. Garrett breaks into Julian's bedroom and tells him to come. He does. And you wonder why half of Tumblr ships these two. I mean, really? I know part of it is the performance, that it's turned out at conventions that both the actors have admitted that they were playing up but it was slightly in the writing as well, wasn't it?
Yes, it was.
He invites the Doctor to travel with him to Bajor, presumably some gay bar somewhere.
Gonna take you to a Bajor! Sorry.
Bashir wakes up a less than impressed Sisko to get permission to take a runabout.
I assume this couldn't wait until morning.
No, sir. I need to use a runabout.
I'm waiting.
It's Garak, sir. He wants to go to Bajor.
Bajor, for what?
He wouldn't tell me.
Well, by all means. Will one runabout be enough?
Sisko's look again is just fantastic. Avery Brooks is great in this story.
Yeah. And why are you doing this? And he's just... Because it's on a whim, isn't it? It's on very little...
It's on a whim, but it's on very little evidence, isn't it?
Yeah.
Yes. Just then, Ducat calls to pass on the news that Rugal is the son of a prominent politician called Coathanger or something. I don't know.
Coathanger, yeah. Call him Coathanger.
Coathanger, okay.
Coathanger, yeah.
Sisko points out that Rugal wants to go back to Bajor and that Zolan, who made the accusations of abuse, has mysteriously disappeared. Bashir
the thing is, he's mysteriously disappeared because he won so fucking much
money. He's run with his winnings.
He had to fuck off before Quark did something.
Yeah, they should have cut at that point to Quark sat on the floor blubbing.
And in the meantime, because he does look a bit Zoidbergish, you should have had that guy going.
Yes, yes, he was a bit Zoidbergy, wasn't he?
Well.
Yes,
he was wrong, but he reminds me of Zoidberg. So we should be shuffling around.
He's even called Zolan. That's nearly.
Yeah.
He's the brother of Zoidberg. That's what it is.
Yes.
Zoidberg wins!
Yes, exactly. He just scuttles off with his winnings. Fly's fucked off. It's got nothing to do with politics or anything more intelligent.
Bashir points out the timing of the news and Garrick's request can't be coincidence, and so Sisko sends the Doctor and the Tailor on their way. They arrive at what sounds like the Tosser resettlement centre. I'm sure, again, I must need my ears syringed or something. It's staffed by a woman who's never named on screen, but according to Memory Alpha is called Deela. And she's
a dealer working for a tosser.
Yes, apparently. Oh. And but now this is interesting. This is interesting, and this is the sort of thing you asked me to point out.
Right.
Because she did indeed play an admiral that was named in Star Trek The Next Generation, so I can mention her, okay? Karen Ansell. She played Admiral Brackett in Unification. Yeah, as per usual, she was a fairly crap admiral.
A crap admiral, okay.
But again, Unification. What is... Clearly, somebody who worked on this story worked on Unification because they've employed 3 of the actors that appeared in that. She's not heard of Rugal and clearly doesn't want to share information with Garak. And she plays this really well. Yeah. There's a nice bit of tension here. And she admits she was in the Resistance. And Garak says, "Oh, perhaps we have met."
I love that. The thing is, living on Deep Space Nine, he's got to have developed a thick skin to survive, hasn't he?
A hell of a thick skin, but more of that in a later story, I think.
Yeah.
Deela claims her computers don't work. And Garak reveals he's an expert on computers, although it's only a hobby. Itchy chin.
Yeah.
He's using this groovy eyepiece, which he claims is a simple tailoring tool. Says it's for letting people's pants out. Ta-da! He does make the longest underpants on the station. Can't find any records for Rugal, though. A bunch of Cardassian children emerge, and a girl asks if they've come to take them home. And sadly, Garak tells her no. Back on the runabout, he admits the orphans have no status on Cardassian society. Bashir wants to get to the bottom of the game that is being played, and by way of explanation, Garak points out that Ducat might want to be getting revenge on one of the civilian leaders that ordered the pullout from Bajor. He says,
sorry, Fnar, sorry.
Really?
Sorry.
He says he believes in coincidences, but doesn't trust them. Then we meet Kotanga as he's reunited with his son at the O'Brien's place. We learn that family is everything on Cardassia, and that Padar has failed as a Cardassian by abandoning his son. Then the reunion goes not very well.
Not really, no.
Sisko is stuck arbitrating between the two fathers' claims for Rugal. Then Odo hails to say that Dukat has arrived in Deep Space Nine! Hooray! Yay! For the first time in ages. Sisko is rightly suspicious. The Gull claims he's there to represent the abandoned children.
Oh, won't somebody please think of the children?
Garak has come to the conclusion that Dukat has deleted Rugal's file because it's what he would have done. He's found out who wrote it, though, and when they contact her, she reveals that Rugal was dropped off by a Cardassian military officer, one who was stationed on Terok Nor. This is our first mention of Terok Nor, which is the Cardassian name for Deep Space Nine.
Yep.
At the tribunal, Rugal reveals his earliest memory of his Bajoran father was his Bajoran father teaching him to swim. O'Brien talks about the boy's hatred of Cardassians and of the effect that had on Padar. Then Bashir enters and requests to be able to ask some questions. And by now, Sisko just lets him get on with it. Yeah. He's like, okay, fine. The Doctor gets to the nub of the matter. Padar will soon be in disgrace, his political career over, due to leaving Rugal behind, just at a time when a key inquiry into the occupation is about to begin. Dukat's involvement in the setup is revealed, and he storms out. Yes. As only he can, having given Garak a look. Yes. All the while through this scene, though, Garak is smiling smugly.
Yes, he does look really smart.
He's kind of looking to Bashir and saying, my apprentice has done well. Right, so up until this point, I really love this episode, but then we get this really odd conclusion that I just can't understand, because we find out that Rugal's been sent to Cardassia against his wishes. And despite the fact that Commander doesn't believe he was abused in any way by his Bajoran parents. It's like, what? Well, surely you go... I mean, child's wish. He's not even a child, is he? I mean, I don't know how old he's supposed to be, but he doesn't look that young. So why aren't his wishes being followed in this instance? So both the parents have got a valid claim.
The only thing I could think of is, but he's supposed to be 12, I think, because he was 4 when the dad last saw him 8 years ago.
Right. Oh, well done on the maths there. Thank you.
And I think the idea is that although they haven't perhaps knowingly abused Rugal by raising him to hate his own race, they have been guilty of a form of emotional abuse. Mm-hmm. And therefore, for him to continue to stay with them is going to do him a form of psychological damage. And therefore, the only way that he can be truly healed is if he goes back to his own race and learns to accept who he is as a Cardassian and learn about his people from their own perspective, and then let him make up his own mind as an adult.
Okay, well that's quite good. I would have felt a lot better about this though if then we didn't get a scene with Sisko and Padar where Sisko says, well, perhaps now you can do something about, well, I've saved your political career, perhaps now you can do something about the plight of the orphans on Bajor, to which he clearly basically says no. He's like, maybe, but it's obvious he's doing nothing about it. It's like, oh, what a piece of work, and you're entrusting that poor kid to his care. I mean, hey-ho. Bashir is on another date with Garak, asking what the truth of his relationship with Dukat is, and the Cardassian urges him to work it out for himself. So this is the story that sold Garak as a regular to the show's producers, and you can see why. I mean, again, Andrew Robinson's just fantastic.
Oh, it's brilliant. And the thing is, as well, and the same is true of Thingy, whose name I bloody well should know and have just forgotten, who plays Dukat.
Mark Alamo, or Alamo or something.
They both, in their performances, accentuate the reptilian aspects of Cardassians as designed in the makeup, but I'm not sure was necessarily written in the brief for the character before those two were playing.
Interesting you were saying, because as I was watching this episode, I was thinking the guy who plays Badar actually didn't come across as that Cardassian. I mean, it's partly the makeup. He hasn't got the neck, that's the thing. No. They haven't hired an actor like Mark Alamo or Andrew Robinson that have got quite prominent necks. So as a result, he doesn't look right. He's like somebody's bashed him over the head or something.
Yeah.
Those two act quite differently to human beings, don't they? Far more convincing, aren't they?
Yeah, but they are reptilian. They've both made a choice to play it that way.
Yeah.
And I think what you find is later on, that becomes part of the brief that later guest actors are given.
Yeah.
But I think at this stage they weren't. It's just that
But some of the ones
two...
we saw in the Next Generation, I think most of those had really long necks, actually. I think...
But they didn't necessarily have a reptilian portrayal.
Maybe not.
In terms of things like mannerisms and stuff. Little cocking your head to one side and small things that you see in reptile behaviour that I happen to know those actors have deliberately put in their performances. I think Mark Alamo sometimes raises his head and shoulders to elongate his neck at certain times. Things like that. And there's conscious decisions that they've made that I think later on became part of the brief. But I'm not sure they were part of the brief at this stage, which is why that civilian guy doesn't really... I mean, you can retcon it. You can say that guy's a civilian guy. And the reptilian aspects are...
more in the military.
More in the military / spy / whoever Garak is, who we know blatantly is not just a plain simple tailor, even if at this stage we don't know what he is. And that guy is a civilian, so maybe, it's not as prominent, I don't know. But in terms of real time, I think that's what it is, that those two came back more often because of the way they played it, and they both chose to be more reptilian in their portrayal. I like it. I think it's brilliant.
Yeah, it's a great story, isn't it? Absolutely fantastic. Shall we find out what others thought?
Yes.
Okay, do you want to read the Mark's feedback?
Okay. Cardassians or Cisco ruins kid's life.
You might be agreeing with me then.
I accidentally skipped this episode and watched Melora. Oh, I seem to remember that was shit.
We'll find out next time.
But thanks to Fatbone Smith, here goes, Cardassians. In the sound and fury of the self-surfing Goldercott's political game, the child's voice is lost in the vacuum of space. This episode brings up some extremely sophisticated, relevant themes with tough grey areas. Racial hatred, the problems of making generalities, the burden of prejudices on a devastated people, and even agonising child custody issues. The Cardassians are not simply villains to be exploited for their shallow plots. They're a fountain of potential for asking probing, intelligent questions that force us to think about a situation from many sides, as this episode does. Big issues aside, this episode packs quite an emotional wallop, as all parties become the victims in a game of political intrigue set in motion by none other than Goldercott. And the story benefits from the first real entertaining pairing of Bashir and Garak. Yay! And the ending is capital D dark. The child fears Cardassians. He doesn't remember anything before he was adopted.
I don't think he fears them, he hates them.
Yeah. Yet he's given no choice but to go to Cardassia with a total stranger, ripped from his obvious loving family, but Goldercott literally stole the child and brought him to an orphanage. Wow, talk about moral grey.
Yep.
This is a quiet episode you shouldn't miss.
Definitely, yeah. Yeah, see, it's not just me that's uncomfortable with that. And I mean, I can see your point that being raised to hate Cardassians wasn't healthy for him, but that's the father he's known and loved. It seems like, I don't know, if you can't really have joint custody when you've got like one father's based on Cardassian, the other's based on Bajor, but there we are. Okay, we also heard from Sampu. Due to reasons stated in my last feedback, I find myself in a position where I have absolutely no time to write proper feedback. If you may remember, he's got a brand new little kiddie. Which is a pity, since this was an all-round excellent episode. Great to see Garak and Goldercat. Also, the dilemma that Sisko finds himself in really has no perfect solution. That's quite true, actually. And frankly, I'm not sure that he ultimately made the correct decision. I think that's also true. But anyway, looking forward to the next bOrgCast, and hopefully I'll manage to get some proper feedback for the next episode. Know what it's like having little kids, so don't stress.
Any feedback is nice.
Yes.
And your points are well made that there isn't actually a correct answer.
Yep. Yeah, there is no correct answer. I'm not sure they made the least worst one, but there we are. Let's find out what Drew and Tracy thought.
Hello, this is our feedback for Deep Space Nine episode Cardassians. What do you think of that one then?
I think that any episode that's Garak heavy is excellent. He's a brilliant character and I loved it.
We did give a little bit of a woohoo when we saw the return of Garak.
We did.
You know, I was absolutely thrilled to see that he was dressed like a watermelon.
He was, yeah.
Loved it as a tailor. This guy needs some awards here. Loved it. Watermelon man. Loved it. So this was another episode where Goldercat was being a right slimo two-faced bastard, wasn't he?
Well, you say that as if that's different to what he normally is.
I know.
He's like that every episode.
I know. So why does Miles hate the Cardassians so much?
He was in the war against the Cardis, as he called them.
Right.
I mean, that's why he's a racist, because he is a racist.
You do call him a racist, but I was And I understand that, but I was actually quite surprised at the contempt that he actually showed Rugal, because he's a child, and you think, come on, Miles, you're better than that, ain't you?
I tell you what, who was worse though, worse than racist Miles, is Keiko. Why did she serve him?
Keep your bib
Why
out,
did she
woman.
serve him Cardassian food? That is the most moronic thing ever.
Well, and it looked
She's been
like
brought up on Bajor. He hates Cardassians.
poo anyway.
Oh, here's some Cardassian food.
Yeah.
Enjoy.
I'm surprised he didn't pick it up and shove it in her
I
face.
should have done.
We were just like, Keiko, keep your bib out. I found it really weird when Rugal was talking about his parents and how they hate the Cardassians, but they don't hate him. It was just a real kind of a bit of a mind brainwashing that this little kid's gone under. And I understand all that, you know. And in a way, there is a good outcome, because you've got Bajorans who've adopted a Cardassian, but to brainwash the child, it's a bit wrong. There's a mixed message in there.
This is shades of grey in the middle.
50 shades of grey.
Exactly. You was talking about how the Cardassians are baddies, but they're not. I felt a lot of sympathy for Koltan Patar. It's difficult. It's not everyone's good and everyone's bad. It felt bad that they've brainwashed him into hating Cardassians, and he's lost a son. It's not black and white.
No. And this led us on to the question that I asked, because the Cardassians invaded Bajor and launched a war against them. So, in theory, you know, you always think that the Cardassians are the baddies and the Bajorans are the victims, but actually, in this episode, it was the Cardassians, not Golda Cat, admittedly, but it was the Cardassians who actually showed more, and I know this is the wrong word, but more humanity, and they showed more feeling.
They did.
So to me, I was on the Cardassian side here.
Yeah, I think that's what the episode's designed to do.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's good. I think this is why Deep Space Nine is so good. It's like, you know, there's not like cowboys wearing black hats are the baddies and the ones with white hats being the goodies, and that's what makes this good.
So this was a good episode in terms of it being a Sisko, Bashir and Garak-led episode from the Deep Space Nine kind of crew.
Yeah.
And I really enjoyed that. It was nice to kind of get to know them a little bit better, because you don't see Bashir in this kind of depth, if you like, in most episodes. And I really loved the way that the Cardassians, when they were going through their little... I can't remember the names of them. The Cardassian, the dad and the Bajoran dad...
Yeah.
Yeah, when they were kind of doing their, we need an impartial view.
The arbitration.
Star Trek, the next generation. You love throughout the nation. You're my favourite show. Was in every episode, you're lucky. You don't have to wait for passes. You just step into the transporter and off you boldly go.
We are the Org. Our mission is to assimilate Star Trek The Next Generation, Star Trek Deep Space Nine, and beer. Lots of beer.
Hello!
Hello!
And welcome to bOrgCast 7.6. A bit of general feedback from the last podcast. I mentioned about I couldn't find anywhere on Memory Alpha what ship Verard was using, which was we only saw briefly in a scene. From Invasive Procedures, but having done a bit more, they do mention the name of the ship very briefly, and I turned the subtitles on and did a search on that, and it turns out that the model they used was the Lycian Sentry Pod from way back in Conundrum, which they've used a couple of times in Next Gen, but I think this is first Deep Space Nine appearance. We also, of course, had the great debate over whether to continue with my IMDb rating for every episode. And it has to be said that we had an awful lot of feedback on Twitter. Thanks very much, folks.
Thank you.
And it was a resounding victory for Team Peter. Yay!
So now you've got to come up with a jingle.
I've come up with a jingle, and Mr. Purry has suggested a name for the segment.
Yes.
So he gets the no prize. That's been sent in the post, sir. We also had some tunes suggested by JJ for the new segment, but I've gone for one that she didn't suggest, but you'll hear that when we get to it. But thank you, JJ. She also mentioned the Quartermaster Stores, which we played out on last time. It was a staple road trip song in our family with increasingly ridiculous lyrics.
And we also heard from Damien Allmark, who's Argyle Smurf on Twitter. He's just started listening, so he's on Measure of a Man, and he says he loved it. Thank you. I guess it'll be a while
before you hear this message, yes.
But hello.
Blimey, way back near the beginning of Season 2. Okay, So let's find out what this evening's Next Generation episode is like. Dark Page.
In the darkest corners of the mind,
It's so strange. It's almost as if her brain has shut itself down.
hide the deepest secrets of the past,
I'm going to try and contact her telepathically.
where shocking memories may lurk.
Get away from here! No!
And the only thing more dangerous than getting in
I want you to sever your connection to your mother.
is getting out.
This isn't real.
Next time on Star Trek: The Next Generation.
Or the trailer doesn't have any spoilers.
No, it's a pretty well-made trailer, that one. Pretty good
Yeah.
stuff.
Yeah. So I'm not going to give a massive synopsis, simply because an awful lot of it's watch, don't tell.
Uh-huh.
So, but I'm going to cover the key points. So you start with the fact that there's this race called the Cairn on the Enterprise.
Very muddy situation, and presented much more interestingly and indeed more even-handedly. I suppose it's helped by the fact that neither side is Starfleet. You know, we don't have one side of this being Starfleet and the other side being Alien of the Week. This was very much Starfleet was mediating the dispute between two different cultures, and I think that's good because that gives us a more neutral position. But like I say, overall there's a lot of fun to be had in this episode, and it's a really well written episode. I thought it went along at a good pace, and I mean, again, maybe it was coming with low expectations when I first watched it, saying, it's Suddenly Human again, and realising, no, it was a lot better than Suddenly Human. I think that worked really well for me. So, overall, I can't fault this episode. Oh, actually, before I go, I was also going to talk about how O'Brien's kind of included, because they were bringing up O'Brien's prejudice against Cardassians, but then the way he kind of talked to the boy whose name I can't remember, and he was essentially talking him around a little as well, how you can't judge a whole species for all that you might want to, and that was kind of interesting, the way that they used O'Brien for that, as I say, we're sort of seeing a bit more of a complex character in O'Brien as well, which we have seen a bit of in some of his previous episodes, but it's always good to see. So yeah, overall, a very enjoyable episode and very well written. I think we are beginning to see in episodes like this what Deep Space Nine can really do when it puts its mind to it. So all that remains for me to say is do keep up with the good work. I'm enjoying the podcast, and I will be back to feedback in the next couple of episodes. Until then, bye for now.
Bye.
Jolo, Jonah, Jonah.
Yes, no.
Jonah,
hadn't made the
Jonah,
suddenly...
he's not human.
Yeah, it's all right. Well, you hadn't made the Suddenly Human connection, but you're right, there are definite parallels there, aren't there? Yes.
Yep.
Yes. Instead of Picard getting stabbed, we have Garrett getting bitten.
Yeah.
But yeah, no, good episode, and definitely a sign of what Deep Space Nine is becoming.
Yeah.
Even if it's not quite completely become yet. The fact that Garrick and Ducat will both be very much recurring characters. It's got that sort of sense of belonging to a continuing universe, which is really cool.
And also, I like your point that in the custody battle, neither side is Starfleet. So they don't have to present one side as whiter than white.
Yes,
both
exactly.
sides
There
can be
are
grey.
flaws in their argument.
Yeah, and I like that.
Excellent stuff. Okay, well, we better look at what we're going to be looking at next then. So we're recording on Thursday the 30th. We'll be looking at the Deep Space Nine episode Melora.
I seem to remember that shit.
Bashir in Love. It's going to work out well, isn't it?
Is that our Geordie cipher?
I don't know.
Is it going to...
Star Trek, the next generation. You love throughout the nation. You're my favourite show. Once in every episode you're lucky. You don't have to wait for passes. You just step into the transporter and off you boldly go. Mr. Wall's my favourite person.
We are the Org. Our mission is to assimilate Star Trek: The Next Generation, Star Trek: Deep Space Nine, and beer. Lots of beer.
Hello!
Hello!
And welcome to bOrgCast 7.6. A bit of general feedback.
Star Trek, the next generation. You love throughout the nation. You're my favourite show. Once in every episode you're lucky. You don't have to wait for passes. You just step into the transporter and off you boldly go. Mr. Wall's my favourite person.
We are the Org. Our mission is to assimilate Star Trek The Next Generation, Star Trek Deep Space Nine, and beer. Lots of beer.
Hello!
Hello!
And welcome to bOrgCast 7.6. A bit of general feedback from the last podcast. I mentioned about I couldn't find anywhere on Memory Alpha what ship Verard was using, which was we only saw briefly in a scene from Invasive Procedures. But it, having done a bit more, they do mention the name of the ship very briefly, and I turned the subtitles on and did a search on that, and it turns out that the model they used was the Lycian Sentry Pod from way back in Conundrum, which they've used a couple of times in Next Gen, but I think this is first Deep Space Nine appearance. We also, of course, had the great debate over whether to continue with my IMDb rating for every episode. And it has to be said that we had an awful lot of feedback on Twitter. Thanks very much, folks.
Thank you.
And it was a resounding victory for Team Peter. Yay!
So now you've got to come up with a jingle.
I've come up with a jingle, and Mr. Purry has suggested a name for the segment.
Yes.
So he gets the no prize. That's been sent in the post, sir.
Yeah.
We also had some tunes suggested by JJ for the new segment, but I've gone for one that she didn't suggest. But you'll hear that when we get to it. But thank you, JJ.
Thank
She
you.
also mentioned the Quartermaster Stores, which we played out on last time. It was a staple road trip